get them out of here.
I was just going to stand there till they got out. But it was really interesting. So I didn't really want to stop them because it was a good conversation. All right. Well, we're on to our next conversation today for this panel breakout, which is on electric vehicle programs. And so if you're not excited to hear about electric vehicle programs, exit stage right. This is not the room for you. So, and with me today, I have two amazing panelists. So I'm going to let them tell a little bit about themselves, and then we've got kind of an overview slide for each of them to talk about the work that they're doing in this space. But I'll go ahead and start with you, Seth. So Seth Frader Thompson, president of Energy Hub. Do you want to give a quick, just 1 minute, like, hey, this is what I do for a living? And
sure, yeah. Can we do a slide switcheroo? Is that possible?
Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, why don't we do that? We'll just start with Lindsey.
Oh, no, now this one's up.
Okay.
Right. We'll just keep going back and forth.
We got this.
Okay, so hi, Seth Frader Thompson. Is this on? Yeah, okay. President, co-founder of Energy Hub. We're going to get into the details on EVs in a second, but what I want to start with is just we're super early in the EV journey, and EVs are going really well. And I would say that there's no other category of DER that was this successful in utility programs this early in its life cycle. If I compare this to what was going on with batteries, with thermostats, with pool pumps, water heaters, it's just nothing is like this, right? So if you look at some of the key stats here, our highest performing program right now has about 25% of all the EVs in their territory already enrolled in their managed charging program. That is amazing. Like, we should have a goal of getting as close to 100% as possible, but it to be in the first few years at 25%, it's awesome. We've shown that we can easily shift 90+% of EV charging out of the peak window and into the not peak area. And customers love the program. 68 NPS, that's like Starbucks NPS. Right? That's like above Whole Foods.
That's a holy grail number right there.
And so
really good.
I'm mentioning that because I've listened to so many EV programs where people are like, keep in mind it's America and it's cars and you gotta get this right. Don't screw it up. But like, they love it. Like, this costs you nothing. And actually it's probably dramatically improving the relationship you have with your customers if you're a utility. And then the last thing, and I promise I'll stop, there's one number on here that's a lie. It says 1 million DERs in our programs. We're at 998,000 as of yesterday.
We're going to round up for you.
There's going to be a gong that goes off at some point, and we're going to cross the million.
I'm excited. Post that on LinkedIn when it happens. All right.
Congratulations.
That is exciting.
Too early.
Yeah, that is exciting. Okay, so now we have Lindsey McDougall from Austin Energy here locally. So she's going to talk a little bit about herself, and then we're going to kick it off into discussion.
Thanks, Jen. Is this working?
Yes.
I'm Lindsey McDougall. I work for Austin Energy Electric Vehicles.
No, here, use mine.
An emerging technologies team. I've been on the team for almost 10 years now, and we're the third largest public power utility in America. So we are municipally owned, which means we get to do a lot of cool stuff. We are governed by our city council, and our city council answers to our community, and our community really wants these programs. They're very into environmental sustainability, and so I'm so pleased to be able to provide these kinds of programs to them. I have a list of just a large suite of programs that we have.
We're just going to flip that slide real quick.
But we've been in the game for over 10 years now. So we have a driver program. We have over 1,500 charging ports out there that support a driver program. We have a DC fast network. We do rebates for multifamily, home, and commercial, and also fleets. Even a DC fast charging station rebate. We have a program, EVs for Schools, an e-ride program. We offer dealership support through several programs. And what I'm really excited to talk about today mainly is our demand response programs. Back in 2016, we launched an EV360 program, which utilized a sub-meter. And it was a pilot program, and we enrolled 100 people into that program. And we have a lot of lessons learned from that. And right around when we were closing out those enrollments, the marketplace proved this demand response available to us with charging stations. And we saw our sub-meter program as really limiting because it required the customer to install electric conduit at their home, and it required a lot of permitting that we actually had to provide ourselves because our service territory exceeds our city limits, so we couldn't always depend on our our permitting staff to do it. And we saw all of this as a barrier to enrollment because of just all the steps and all the heavy-handed, work the customer had to do. And so we're really excited to offer this demand response program with Energy Hub that utilizes the charging stations and soon vehicle telematics. Most of our electric vehicle drivers in Austin drive Teslas. And so this is really going to take a big bite out of that population and be able to manage their charging, which is better for the grid.
Yeah, I was actually, is this one going to work? I was actually just reading that Tesla hit nearly 500,000 in new sales in 2022. So they're clearly pushing the market forward. I mean, obviously not everyone can have a Tesla. And I'm sure in Austin, you've got, different levels of people's ability to invest. And so, I mean, you've been at this for quite a while. So you've got a lot of different programs. I think Austin's pretty far ahead of some of the other utilities that haven't had as much of a progressive community pushing for this. So, you've learned a lot, I think, about your customers. You talked about the sub-meter element of it and now moving away from that to charging stations. Like, how have you evolved your interaction style with these customers as your programs have evolved? And what have you really learned from that? And how have you changed your approach over time because of that?
Yeah, so in the beginning, it was all about incentivizing ownership of EVs and brand awareness that Austin Energy is a resource to people buying EVs. So we had marketing campaigns that didn't even speak about our rebates. It was just electric is greater than gas. You may see some T-shirts around here. Or one of our marketing campaigns was the electric city is here. So just to get it out there in the community that Austin Energy has their thumb on this and that we're a resource. And then we started some of the nation's first programs to incentivize this with a rebate program to incentivize commercial properties to buy charging stations and to connect with our driver rate. And we soon offered the home charging station rebates, and it's really evolved to a lot of outreach now, a lot of community support. Really, in the last years, we've gone heavy on dealership outreach and LMI outreach to really make sure that from the point of EV purchase all the way to getting the charging station and throughout town charging, you're really supported all through the way, and that we're not leaving anyone behind. But now at our 10-year anniversary, and now we have all these programs, we have to kind of take a hard look at these programs and really decide what's going to get us into the future. And are these programs serving us the way we want them to? And can we even continue offering them at scale with this huge adoption wave we're about to see? We're still in early adopter phase, so we don't want to stop incentivizing it, but we do need to move more into managed charging to really, control the impact it's going to have on our grid and to hopefully align it with renewables so we can really take advantage of those opportunities in Texas.
I mean, I think that's a really good point. So even though we're at almost 7% of new vehicle sales in the United States as of this year, that's 93% that are still purchasing gasoline. So have you had any pushback from customers that maybe aren't yet taking part in your programs, or like how have you messaged to the non-customers the value of what you're doing for the community and preparing now, related to, grid planning, for instance, and how you're thinking about, the impacts in the long term of high penetrations of electric vehicles on the grid?
Well, education is huge. Our EVs for School program, is directed at children to, learn these lessons. And just like I did when I was a kid and went home and criticized my parents for not recycling, we hope the next generation will do a similar thing with, why are you still driving this gas car?
Yeah, I like shaming. That works really well.
And with this grid edge stuff, we have an opportunity to change our customers into prosumers and really change that dynamic to a two-way interaction between us and the customer. And EV drivers love to talk about their EV and their programs, and so they do a great job of informing the community. And the more we can spread the knowledge that these kinds of programs that shift the load into the renewable production, it puts downward pressure on all of our rates. If we can get this right, it'll make all of our rates less expensive and more affordable for us. And clean air is enjoyed by everyone.
Right.
So we can always lean on the environmental benefits.
I think those are really two really important messages, though, for people who maybe haven't been exposed to electric vehicles or don't know quite how fun they are to drive. For instance, I just got my EV6, a new car, in December, and my son got a ticket within the first 2 days of ownership. He was like so excited to take it out. Well, it's got really great torque, as everyone knows, with electric vehicles. So as he passed that police officer on the left,
hopefully you're shaming him for that.
He had to pay that ticket. It was not pretty. I think they're fun to drive. It's a win-win-win, right? They're good for, if we control it, which we're going to talk about next with Seth. They can really help enhance grid operations as well and grid reliability, and they're fun to drive. So it really is a win-win-win. But, we'll talk about also how do we get those experiences in the hands of everyone, right, within your community, not just those that can afford to buy the Tesla, but those that, maybe are using car sharing as an option, or busing, or, other vehicle types. So Seth, you're helping them roll out a new demand response program, some managed charging happening. So tell us a little bit about that and how you're working with Austin.
Yeah, so it's a 3-phase program. So the first phase, which is where we are right now, is kind of testing out with customers who had previously been in receipt of some of these, really quite generous rebates, getting them to sign up for flexibility. So we're in the testing phase, working through some kind of back-end IT stuff. As soon as we're out of that, we go to, if we sort of think crawl, walk, run, the walk phase is going to municipally owned EVSEs. So there's 91 chargers at 15 locations around Austin. About 300 vehicles in the fleet. So testing the actual charging control at that level. And then once we graduate from that phase, we go sort of territory-wide. Any participating EVSE or EV vendor/manufacturer will be able to participate. So I think the approved list, or the ones that are soon to launch, are ChargePoint, NLX, EvoCharge, forgetting one, Emporia, Tesla, and then hopefully we'll bring a lot more. We've got, a dozen or more additional folks who are in the pipeline. So that's really good. I will also talk kind of maybe meta of like, where does DR go? DR is sort of step one, in the sense that you're just trying to avoid the existing peak and try to avoid making that peak even worse. And so in Austin, they're subject to 4CP within ERCOT, so their transmission charges are allocated based on their contribution to the peak. So step one is kind of do more of that, which is consistent with other DR programs. But then, as Lindsey mentioned, once you've done all the work, you've done all the hard work of getting the vendors involved, getting customers to participate, you then unlock the true thing, which is managed charging, and allowing you to shape load overnight and essentially do whatever is the most effective, most sort of beneficial thing for society.
And we talked, like, if you've got a big wind day, for instance, in ERCOT, maybe if there's consistency in that and you can predict it, then you can maybe tap into that as well to make better use of that resource. So just to follow up on that, let's talk about EVs from a load shaping standpoint. What's possible? What are we doing with it?
So in aggregate, we talked about kind of peak mitigation. The sort of second piece of peak mitigation is to avoid creating a new peak. So what's your peak hours now?
2 to 7.
2 to 7. Okay, so let's just say you ran a really successful marketing campaign, which is something Austin does really well. And you said, everybody, don't start charging until 8 or 10 or midnight. And then if that was wildly successful, the next problem you have is you have a big timer peak where everybody starts charging at exactly the same time. Now you've just moved your problem from point A to point B, and that's not the solution. So at a system level, it's just about smoothing it out over the course of the evening. That's kind of That's kind of the easy thing. The next thing is to look at, well, what else do we want to optimize for? Can I look at a wind production forecast overnight and align the system, the bulk of that charging, to fit within the wind production curve? Or look at wholesale prices on the ERCOT market. Look at LMP. Lost my train of thought. Once you're at that point, you're still kind of treating the whole thing as one resource. So then you start to think about, okay, how do I solve problems that are going to come with really high penetrations of EVs? And then you start to think about equipment limits, saying, all right, yes, the wind is blowing. I would love to be able to charge all of these cars at exactly the same time because the wind is blowing, but I can't do that because then I'm going to exceed some component's thermal limit. Yeah. And so then you start layering in a bit more complexity. But all of this is enabled by the fact that EVs are kind of the perfect flexible resource. A typical car is plugged in for 12 hours and only needs to charge for 2 to 3 hours, which means you can kind of place that charging anywhere you want, and you can stagger one customer before or after another.
Yeah, that's such a good point. AESP is obviously really big into demand flexibility and load flexibility. And we just did a survey recently as we were building out a course, and I was fascinated that we asked for a ranking of what was the ideal demand flexible load, and EVs was at the very top of the list because, it's the least painful, but also I think the highest level of incentive with the size of the batteries. So there really is a lot you can do with it, even in conjunction with these other resources, right? So pairing them up together with other resources too.
Yeah, and that's something that I think very few companies, whether utilities or vendors, are actually doing. Where you're taking what's the VPP that's made up of a bunch of thermal loads. What is that doing, and how does that interplay with something that's made up of a bunch of batteries or a bunch of other things? We will get there, but that's not the problem most people are solving today.
Yeah, not yet here, at least not in the United States, right? So. Well, let's talk about, okay, we've talked about this evolution of processes and programs, and we're getting more and more engaged with the customer. But what on the utility side really makes a program successful? So even if you've got people that are clamoring to sign up and they're, beating down your door to say, we've got an EV and we want to participate in a DR program. On the program side, for you to work within the utility, what's really important to make sure you've got right?
Yeah, I would say really understand your resources that you have to work with within the utility. When working with Energy Hub, we were largely constrained by our ability to process the rebates with our online cloud services portal. It's called EECP, and so it was surprising how much this program influenced program design, and I know you can do it without the utilities rebate processing system. They have a solution for that, but Austin Energy really wanted to maintain that relationship with our customers and really be at the center of that relationship to maintain the trust that we've been building all these years. Really, I mean. This EECP, it's like it was influencing our program design up until the very end. We only added the reoccurring annual incentive just at the end because we proved it possible with this software. And we weren't going to do it until we could see it was automated. We didn't want to rely on people, researching enrollment data to make sure that charging station was still online after a year, because that's not a scalable process.
Well, I imagine then you get some stink eye too, right? Within the utility, they're not too happy with you if you've made extra work for them, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's never good. You don't want the evil eye.
You're still going to get stink eye from someone, right? Like someone's going to be mad that you why can't you just do this manually? Why does this have to be an IT process, or vice versa, right? Like someone's always going to be upset. But the reality is these programs force you to think about everything, right?
Definitely. And with EV programs, they're going to grow people. Like your customers are going to love them. This technology is coming. Plan for growth, plan for mass scale, and also plan for cancellation. Even though it's so popular and so many customers love this, there are people who move out of your service territory or choose not to be enrolled anymore, and you have to do the customer journey all the way to the end and really put yourself in the seat of the customer of those scenarios. And are you going to be able to successfully close out that program, that customer's enrollment to the program in an effective way that's not going to upset them?
And how did you test that out? I think you mentioned to us when we were talking earlier that you did some like test pilot groups, right? To make sure that you understood that customer journey and experience prior to kind of rolling it out to a bigger audience. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we as a team, which first of all, I'd like to acknowledge Ross Tomlin in the back here. He represents like the thermostat side of things. If you can. He's shy.
He's going down the wall.
But one thing I think Austin Energy did really well is they teamed up the groups, the group who was already working with Energy Hub's product with the thermostats with the EV team. And so we came together and we've been meeting weekly for probably 2 years now. And we went back and forth a long time about do we rush this out to our service territory and open up enrollment to everyone? And, of course, there's lots of benefits to quickly getting enrollments and quickly seeing this load shifted and avoided cost associated with that. But we really wanted to make sure it worked. And so we did decide to do a test population, and we leaned on our customer base. Since we have this suite of programs for over 10 years, we have a lot of customers that we can already reach out to, and we know they have EVs. So we turned to our rebate recipients, which given the maturity of these programs, we've been planning for this. So back in 2018, we tiered our rebate to incentivize higher the communicating charging stations, the ones that could actually communicate with Energy Hub. So I'm really glad we did that. And so we were able to, and we also redesigned our contract, which mandated these customers participate with us. And so we reached back out to that population of rebate recipients and really appealed to their early adopter mentality and the fact that they signed that contract with us. We're like, come help us. And we spoke to, their willingness to help us achieve really big things and grid resilience and kind of asking them, please come join us to test this out. They knew they were test participants. And so we got our enrollment, and sure enough, there's problems with enrollment, which we did not anticipate.
But there always are, right? I mean, that's why we do these test cases. I think that's so important.
Yeah, and so we're working that out, and I'm just so grateful that we tested it with this particular group. And EV drivers, they're a different population of customers. Like, they're so willing to be engaged, and they really feel like they're a solution for these problems. And so they're really understanding when we can't. When we had to tell them, like, I'm sorry, we're not able to deliver this enrollment incentive right away, but we're working on it, and they believe us. We're going to get it to them. We're going to fix it.
Well, and they're part of the solution, right? Because they are making sure that it works right for those next fast followers, right? The ones that are going to be a little bit harder for you maybe to convince to take that plunge, right?
Exactly.
So that's exciting. Well, so what's next? What's possible today in the world of managed charging, Seth? Where are we headed? You're doing these projects. We just saw your amazing chart with demand response, and managed charging is an up and coming thing. So where are we headed next? And what are those tools and resources that you need to continue to evolve these programs?
Yeah, I think this is a yes and sort of a strategy, right? And I think the way Austin is approaching this makes sense. It's saying, okay, we need every class of vehicle, we need the EVSE, and we need the EV. We want to make this available to any qualified vendor. Like, the answer is yes, just come sign up, right? I think we should remember that what's amazing about this is somebody went out, they bought an EV, they said, now I have a sweet new car. It happens to be great for the environment, and now my utility is coming and saying I can do something even better for the community. Like, that is actually a pretty appealing thing. You wouldn't see these sign-up numbers. The key things for me here are when you make it simple, you give the customer a really strong value proposition that works. Something Austin Energy does really well is create sort of a sense of community around it, right? Like, they make it cool. They started a long time ago, so people have been hearing this in the background for a really long time, which is something that utilities have done with other DERs. I would love for Lindsey to talk about sort of the way they adapted sort of the who's involved in making space for vendors, because I think having an ecosystem, a really rich ecosystem of participating vendors, is crucial for getting a lot of folks to participate, including the OEMs in program design.
Yeah.
Right now, we know how to get EVSE manufacturers to participate. We know what gets them excited, and we know what some of the auto manufacturers are doing. But the auto manufacturers are putting really big claims out there, right? They're telling the public investors, like, we're going to have a $25 billion a year subscription business, and we know that part of that is built on the utility business model. And so incorporating them sort of early, I think, is really important. The last thing I'll say is I think that we want to set a really high bar for success. If I look at the bar, so thermostats are the largest of our share of million DERs. Thermostats are by far the largest. The high-performing programs get 7 to 8% of residential customers to participate today. That Austin's in that camp. The big Arizona utilities, some of the folks in the Northeast. That will grow over time, I hope, to 20%, maybe 25%. But I think there's going to be a lot of people who are saying, nah, I don't need to enroll my thermostat. I think we should design these EV programs so that the default is that everyone says, yes, I'm going to participate, because why not? Because it costs me nothing. And I've done something that its power's cheaper, it's cleaner, it's just as reliable. Why wouldn't I do this?
Yeah, give them a reason. I mean, they'd have to give you a reason why not, right?
Exactly.
At this point. And I think I agree with you. We are a very rare breed. But I think it's interesting, too, to just compare this industry, like you said earlier, with how solar rolled out, for instance, and how, bring your own thermostat programs rolled out. It is a very different set of people, I think, that are a little more excited about this. They really enjoy their cars. I know I love driving my car. It's fun. But as we move forward and you start to get those fast followers and you start to move forward on that diffusion curve, what does success look like? So if we had to say this is what a successful rollout looks like across the board, like, Lindsey, what is that for Austin Energy? Like, what would say, okay, our work here is done. We're now just going to focus on integration issues. What does that look like for you in your community?
Well, first and foremost, we need a robust marketplace of charging station providers, electricians to work on these charging stations, and program offerings from utilities are great, but really we just need the companies to come in and provide the infrastructure. And, Austin Energy can be there to provide the electricity and permitting, of course, to make it all safe and reliable. But we're making steps to encourage this. We are a municipally owned utility, so we had a monopoly on this. When we first offered our programs, city code stated that Austin Energy was the only entity allowed to install charging stations and charge a fee for sessions. And so we were the only provider for many, many years. And in 2018, we petitioned, Austin Energy petitioned to change city code to allow third-party enterprises to charge session fees. And soon after, we saw a lot of infrastructure. And now there's so many DC fast providers in town. And so we don't have to be the sole provider of that service. And it gives, and customers like options, they like competition, so it puts pressure on prices. And we're also looking at how are our existing programs supporting this, just like we saw how this code intended to protect us and protect the consumer. It had unintended consequences that was keeping the market out of our community. So now we're at this 10-year anniversary, and we've got great adoption in town. We can take the time to really look at these programs and understand their impact, and are we getting the results that we want, and make some hard choices maybe.
Well, I will say this. You are one of a very small amount of utilities I've heard that really made the call for, bringing in the market. But I think that's so important that you did that, because you're not just building demand for electric vehicles. You're actually building out an ecosystem and a true local market. So I think that's really something that is innovative and should be applauded. So
Can I also just highlight, like, if you just look at Texas, Austin Energy's getting it right. CPS is getting it right. These are both still local monopolies, right? But they're designing their programs to not be monopolistic, right? They're saying that robust ecosystem. If you look at the competitive region of ERCOT, there's almost nothing smart happening with EVs, right?
It's true.
Like, it's when I set out on this journey like 15 years ago, I never would have thought that like the utilities would consistently be the ones that are doing it smarter, faster, more customer centric than the like competitive customer centric ones. It isn't the way we were told.
And we're teaming up. CPS, Austin Energy, New Braunfels Utility, and LCRA are the 4 public power utilities in the Central Texas region, all surrounding the I-35, the major interstate corridor through our towns. And we are coming up with a regional EV strategy, and one of it is to welcome the market. We need to create a whole market ecosystem.
I can think of this from so many different perspectives, right? It's economic development, it's innovation. You're reducing constraints on the grid potentially in the areas that you need it by being able to direct when you're using managed charging. So, I mean, I'm so excited about what you're doing here. I would ask you, so what is the most important, based on your experiences, both of you, what's the most important thing to get right when thinking about these EV customer programs, and how do you make the market continue to grow? So I'll start with Lindsey, and then Seth, I want to hear your broader opinion because you're working across the whole country on these issues right now.
Well, you don't want to leave anyone behind. Like, we have a lot of lessons in other industries of that happening. So we can really change that dynamic with us and get that right to where, as we grow, we lift everyone in our community to have access to this technology and the health outcomes. So a big measure of our success on our team is the impact we have on multifamily. We see that as a key indicator of our ability to connect with that community. And if we can enable them to charge their cars easily, then we have succeeded as a community.
I agree. That's such an important segment of the population that we have to get right, especially in urban regions, because a lot of people don't have garages, right? They don't have a place to install that infrastructure. And we always hear the statistics about where people charge. They charge at home, the majority of the time. But if you live in an apartment complex, that's not happening unless you have an amazing landlord or an amazing utility that's willing to work with your landlord, right, or the community around you. So Seth, what do you think? What's critical to get right at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the urban charging problem is a real problem. Like, I live in New York City. I have an electric vehicle. I charge my electric vehicle in like the basement parking lot of a grocery store that happens to have cheap charging. I'm like, it's so easy that I'm worried that the word will get out and that everyone will be doing that, because I have no idea how anyone else is.
Don't tell anyone about that spot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
I think simplicity, right? I think like a well-run utility DER program, especially for EVs, is kind of like the sort of the duck metaphor, right? Of like the furiously moving below the surface, but like nice and smooth and simple on the top. So I think to the customer, you want this to just be simple. Like, would you like to do this? Yes or no? Yes. Cool. I'm in. I understand what's in it for me. I'm going to get my incentive. No problem. Because below the surface, it's complicated, right?
Yeah.
You're getting data in a million different formats from different manufacturers. Every API has different capabilities of how you can control it. You got to just like completely remove that complexity for all but a very small handful of people. The customer, the programs people, the grid operators who are in the running the trading desk. All these people just need to know that there's a VPP backed by electric vehicles, and it works, and everything else needs to be totally invisible.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's what I'm hearing industry-wide throughout the U.S. and Canada, is that where we're seeing pitfalls and challenges is really where we've made it complicated. We were trying to hit all the bells and whistles or do all the things, and like we check so many boxes theoretically, but then in practice, it gets down to those interactions with others within the markets and within the utilities. And then the customer's just like, what do I have to do to participate? So, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we can bring the rest of the utility with you on this journey, and what are some practical steps that people who are trying to launch these programs can take within their utilities to help grease the wheels and get people excited about it, and create champions within your utility to support these efforts?
So one thing we did is a blessing and a curse, I think. So we really developed our programs as like a sub entity of the utility. We call ourselves like a startup within the utility. And so we have a large staff. There's about 10 of us working on our team, and a large portion of that staff is dedicated to just running these programs and dealing with customer inquiries. And so we have a lot of EV experts in that team, and we see it as really important to develop those EV professionals within the utility. So we have this great resource for customers, and we can do a lot of great work within that small team. But the problem is we grew kind of separate from the utility. So we didn't completely integrate fully with the call center, or, where we did integrate with the billing system, it was kind of rushed, and we didn't really think it out for scalability. So, although we have this great resource as our team, I think lessons learned is we probably should have had like more of a hybrid approach as growing, like make sure every year of maturity we're kind of deepening our reach within the utility itself. Because now I'm turning to my utility expecting them to support these programs for scale, and they're like, who, what are we starting from? And I think we could have integrated them a little bit sooner and eased that burden on ourselves.
Seth, I think you and I had a similar conversation about like when to bring in the power marketers and the grid operators. Like, they might ignore you for a while, but like at some point, like it becomes a bigger thing, right? And then they're like, "Why didn't you talk to me about this?"
Right. Exactly. I think that the course that Lindsey described, I think it's almost inevitable if you do this right. Like, you guys have a separate call center just for EV stuff. You've got this whole team. So you've got a bunch of people who are building the subject matter expertise, and you're building the playbook, you're building the knowledge quickly, but you are creating a silo. And so you have to sort of know that at some point you've got to blow up that silo and connect it to other silos. And so what we see, in particular with other DERs that are already at larger scale, you get to that point where I think, what I was telling you, Jen, was I remember one of our larger clients, they were their VPP was 25 megawatts. They went to the operators. The operators were like, too small, don't care. 50 megawatts, too small, don't care. 100 megawatts, yeah, why didn't you tell me about this earlier? But then the next thing was like, can I give that a try? And I think that's the main thing. Like, the meta conversation we're having here is about grid flexibility, but the sort of smaller version of flexibility is, you've been building this thing up. You may have set out some grid services. You may have said the definition of flexibility for this resource is being able to do X, Y, or Z. But then you hand it over to the power marketers, and they're like, "Can I try this other new use case?" And it's easy for a program to fall into the sort of a groove of, this is what we do with this program. We avoid charging in these hours and prefer it on these other hours. But once you turn it over, you've got to have a built-in mechanism for letting people tinker with it, right? You've got to have the ability, if you've got 10,000 people signed up with EVs, can you break off 100 just in software, right? It's not like a new program. It's just carve out a mini aggregation and let that aggregation be a separate VPP that's doing its own thing, because those operators are going to be skeptics right up until the point where they put their hands on it, tried it a few times, and then come to believe that it actually works.
Yeah, and sometimes they can end up being your biggest champions and advocates within the utility, right? I think we were talking about this too. Like, it's once you get people excited about this and they see the sort of capability and power, they are not only good for telling you what could go wrong, but they might also be able to help you with what could be solved, right? And how do you deal with these issues? And I think, Lindsey, you were saying like you're now kind of keeping a roadshow. You've got a roadshow where you're telling people what's happening with your programs. I think that's a great story. Like, tell us more about that.
Yeah, so when I meet with Austin Energy's IT, I start the meeting with Austin City Council has deemed 2030 as the year that we reach 40% vehicles miles traveled. And that means we all need to work together to make these programs more accessible to our customers. And it really makes them a part of the big picture, that this is more than just another IT enhancement. This is something that's ushering in a sustainable future for our community.
And I think you probably did this as well. Like when I was at Orlando Utilities, we put all of our VPs like in an EV. We said, you need to drive this car so that you can tell the story. And by the end of that, they were like, yep, this is a cool car and everyone should drive one. I mean, I think that's helping them be your advocates, right, within the utility by experiencing it.
Yes, I've heard of some utilities that offer generous stipends, like an increased vehicle stipend for their executives to drive the EV over gas powered. And I think that's a great idea.
We'll close out with just one final thought. I mean, we've talked a little bit about low to moderate income and how we bring everyone with us on this journey. So what's next as far as in the next 3 years, are you going to start to look at maybe the secondary use market or that last mile source of transportation and think about how to engage at that next level?
Oh, yeah. So Bobby and Amy on my team in the front row, they do the most creative projects to really engage that community. Just talk to them about some of the cool stuff that they've worked on. We had like a gig ride service EV program with GM's Maven. We tried that. We do ride and drive events in low to moderate income communities. We have this really cool buyer's guide that's unique, that really, it's dynamic, it's updated regularly, and it really empowers the customer to make those choices from home.
Awesome. Well, thank you to both of my amazing panelists today. Give them a big round of applause.
Thank you.
And we have only about 2 or 3 minutes, but if there are any questions that anyone in the audience would like to ask, the floor is yours. You're like, no, I just want to get out of here. Or... Oh, here we go. Okay.
And the rest of the utility to show them value. What is your current capability to, for example, manage charging at a circuit level or even the transformer level? Is that happening? Is it coming?
Yeah, that happens. That's actually been available for like 5 years in the platform, and it's only in the last like maybe 2 or 3 that people have started doing it. But yeah, it's fairly straightforward.
So in other words, like those very strategic, specific areas on the system that need support, you can kind of manage at the distribution level.
Yeah. So the key things are saying like, okay, one use case is someone at the utility is they're in the distribution operations center and they're looking maybe at some data from SCADA and it says, okay, we're approaching like a load limit here. And then they kind of swivel over here and they say like, can I call an event on that circuit? That's a pretty straightforward thing. I think the thing that's a bit more complicated is if you want to just sort of have, I've mapped the grid. This piece of the grid has an operating limit, and I want to always stay within that operating limit because it's usually not one operating limit. Usually you have like the service transformer. You've got the transformer for the feeder. So that gets much more complicated. In simple terms, that's relatively easy today. In the big emergent use cases, nobody is actually pushing the envelope on that yet.
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
All right.
So I got acquainted with Austin Energy 10 years ago when I was interested in infrastructure. And so I want to thank you all for starting the ball rolling. And I'm wondering to what extent either or both of you have gotten into the East Coast market, the DC area, the DMV.
I think she has a specific need she's looking for in the DC area. Are you operating in the DC area yet with any programs?
Yeah, we've run a program in Baltimore. Looking to Chris, where else?
Atlantic City is the DC area, and in Baltimore, Atlantic City, but not in DC.
I bet you could find some people here, though, that are in the DC area to talk to about that. Awesome. Well, we are right at time. So again, thank you so much to my amazing panelists, and thanks for a great conversation.